Hi, my name is Kerry Critchlow from RCR Recording Studios, and today I'm doing another Thinking Out Loud video. And the topic today, maybe a little bit controversial, is do drugs have a place in music? And when I say drugs, I mean alcohol, marijuana, heroin, the whole gambit. Do drugs have a positive influence on artists and musicians? Does it help you create great art? What is the role that it plays? And can it be more beneficial than it is harmful? And at the end of the day, I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that question, but I can give perhaps a little bit of insight and a few stories to help maybe temper what expectations you might have. But one thing that is very clear is that it is definitely a cliche that musicians are all druggies or alcoholics, or just need the extra chemicals to help them with their creative process. And while that may be true to some extent, it is not by any means the a rule. There were great composers throughout the history of music that have done amazing things without drugs, and there are great musicians who have done great things with drugs. So well, let's preface this. Maybe we can do like more of a pros and cons. Again, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. None of these are ever scripted. I just do them off the top of my head and give my two thoughts on whatever kind of is on my mind at the time. And so you can guess where my mind is at. Anyways, a few stories that do stick out to me, and you might put them in the pro-drug use column, would be the fact that the Beatles were heavily influenced by marijuana, especially during their earlier careers. They were actually introduced to marijuana by Bob Dylan, and that's a whole funny story in and of itself. I highly recommend you look into that story if you have the time, but that's not the point. The point is that they were very heavily influenced by drugs in their early career, often using stimulants early in their career, mostly to be able to stay awake during their 8 to 10 hour days of playing at strip clubs in Germany. That apparently can really take a toll on you, and to keep the energy up, they definitely use a lot of stimulants. They were also, mostly all of them, pretty heavy smokers, and yeah, cigarettes are probably also considered drugs, so let's not leave them off the list either. But what marijuana was the thing that really I wanted to talk about when it came to the Beatles, at least at first, and that definitely influenced their early to mid 60s to late 60s music, especially in the studio when they were writing and doing all that kind of stuff. They were, at least in hindsight, they were pretty famous for their drug use. And when they started getting into LSD later on in their careers, at least some of them, not all of them, I don't think that McCarthy got super into it. I know he did it a few times, but I don't think it was really the drug of his choice for him anyways. It was more Harrison and Lennon that really got into the LSD. But George Martin is on record as saying that Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which is arguably the greatest record of all time, would not have sounded the way it did if it were not for the influence of LSD. And so maybe there is some positiveness to doing things that can alter your mind or open up new experiences. But LSD also led to Yoko Ono and some of John Lennon's later solo efforts, which, at least in my opinion, and you're welcome to your own, but at least in my opinion, are not the best work that he's ever done. So take that for what you will. The Smashing Pumpkins were famous for, I say famous, probably very few people know this, but they spent long hours prepping for Siamese Dream, and maybe even prior to Siamese Dream, where they would do mushrooms, and 2 of the 4 members would do mushrooms, and 2 of them would be sober, and they'd have 8-hour practices while the drug was in full effect, and then the next day they'd switch the members who did mushrooms and who were sober, so they could always keep an eye on each other, make sure everything was cool, but there was always some sort of mind expansion going on, and that led to Siamese Dream and a lot of the music that they created in the mid-90s. And later, Billy Corgan got a little bit more heavily influenced by ecstasy which led to more of his techno-influenced work right before the band broke up in about 2001. So, you know, it had an impact on the music. There's no question about that. A lot of the 90s grunge bands, like Nirvana, for instance, was pretty heavily influenced by marijuana and probably heroin too, but heroin is something that maybe we should get into that later. Heroin is not something I would necessarily consider a creative tool. I've never done heroin. I've done a few painkillers, legally prescribed, usually. So I know what the general effect of heroin is, even though I don't know if I could ever fully appreciate how potent heroin in and of itself is. But I'm not sure I would consider narcotics like that to be necessarily super creative or mind-altering or help you create great works of art. If anything, it sounds like it'd be more a great way to just lose yourself and escape life and have no worries. And maybe there is a creative element to that, I don't know. But I will say this: when it comes to heroin specifically, at least in my opinion, way more harm is done than any good. Kurt Cobain took his life at an early age. The original guitarist Hillel Slovak from the Red Hot Chili Peppers died from an overdose of heroin. It led to John Frusciante becoming an absolute I don't even know what the right word is, but man, did it take him down a wrong path until he got clean. The lead singer of why can't I think of their name? Stone Temple Pilots. I cannot. Weiland. He died from a heroin overdose. I mean, the list goes on and on about the amount of pain and damage that heroin has done in the lives of musicians. And for whatever it's worth, I would stay as far away from heroin as you possibly can. Drugs played a role in that Smashing Pumpkins Siamese Dream album, but maybe people don't know that Jim Chamberlain was a heavy heroin user, and during those recordings he would disappear from the sessions for days at a time, just off the grid. No one could find him, no one knew where he was, and cost the band thousands and thousands of dollars and lost studio time, and put way more stress on an already very stressed out Billy Corgan during those recordings. And so I would say, at least from my perspective, that heroin is one of those drugs that really you need to stay away from. It's not going to benefit your life in any way. It's not going to help you create awesome music. If anything, it's probably just going to lead to an early grave and ultimately obscurity. There is a case to be made that some marijuana use and LSD, mushrooms, some of the more hallucinogenic or mind, expanding drugs could potentially have some creative impact and lead to some very interesting things. But there have been a lot of famous musicians who have not done drugs and have had amazing, careers and created amazing music, or at least, from their own mouths, they've said they've stayed away from drugs. I don't know what the truth is. I was not them. I have no idea if they were lying or not, but according to them, they didn't need drugs. Mike Shinoda from Linkin Park would be an example of someone who stayed drug free. Andre 3000 said he never did drugs. Angus Young from AC/DC said he never did drugs. So I mean, there's a case to be made that you don't necessarily need drugs to create great music. Now, and I do consider alcohol on that list. Now, when it comes to certain people, alcohol, if you can handle alcohol, it's fine. But if you take any drug too far, and I mean really any drug too far, it can really lead to some bad things. For instance, Scott Stapp from Creed. Creed was on top of the rock world. They were blowing up. They were like the biggest band in the world. And Scott Stapp would come to concerts and get so drunk that he couldn't perform and fall over on stage and people started demanding their money back, and it really, really hurt his career. And maybe he's going to make a comeback one day. I don't know, but any drugs taken to the extreme are really going to do more harm than good. I mean, I know there's legends about, from the 60s and 70s of these legendary rockers getting, super stoned or, super high on like LSD or mushrooms or what have you, and playing these amazing rock concerts. And you know what? Maybe they did play some amazing music at those shows. I don't know if there are a lot of live recordings of those days, and chances are most of the audience was probably just as high as the band, so I don't know if I trust their opinions either. But who knows? Maybe they did some of their best work when they were under the influence of those drugs. All I can maybe say when it comes to drugs is that, as best as I can tell, it really depends on the person who's using them and what drugs they are. But perhaps it's about moderation, meaning that a little drugs can maybe be a good thing when it comes to creativity and creating some great music and some great performances. But a lot of drugs can lead to some really horrible outcomes, and maybe taking things a little too far, or going too far off into the deep end, and risk alienating people and making maybe less than stellar work, or being unable to perform. When you're so drunk that you can't perform correctly, that's not fun for anybody except maybe the person who's that drunk. I don't know. And I'm not trying to tell you that you should or should not do drugs. That's really ultimately for you to decide. I can say that in my past, I was quite a partier. I've tried quite a variety of drugs myself, heroin not being one of them. Heroin, not big into needles, and as far as I can tell from taking narcotics in pill forms, they're not my cup of tea. And I would recommend other people probably stay away from them. There's probably bad news. It's not going to end well, I don't think. But as far as like marijuana, mushrooms, LSD, maybe even ecstasy, alcohol, cigarettes. Cigarettes are a killer. I still smoke cigarettes. That's a really bad habit that maybe one day I'll get over the hump and quit. I will say that I haven't had a drink in probably over a year, and I haven't smoked marijuana in probably the past 6 months. Has it affected my music? I don't know. Maybe. I can't really tell. I don't know if I have the perspective to be able to tell, but I can say that I've had some experience with drug use, and I don't know if I would say that my music is better or worse for the drugs or not. All I can say is that I think it really depends on the person that's doing the drugs or not doing the drugs. Like I said, you can have great careers without doing drugs. As I said, Steve Albini would be another example. He's a producer, but he said, he never took any drugs, and he thought that it would probably get in the way of creating good music. Whereas another great producer, George Martin, said the Beatles wouldn't have been who they were without drugs. So I don't know. I'm sorry I don't have any answers to these questions. I would recommend maybe doing your own homework and looking into that kind of stuff. I don't think you should do drugs just for drugs' sake. I think they should probably be taken with an intention in mind, if there is intention in mind. Then maybe it can lead to something. But don't do it just because everybody else is doing it. Don't do it because you think that's what rock stars do, because not all rock stars do it. And even some of the biggest rock stars that have done it are not necessarily even all that happy necessarily about what drugs did for them in their lives. It's ruined a lot of careers, and I've seen more than a handful of bands that never got anywhere because they were too busy getting drugs to focus on doing what was important, and that's making the music. It all comes down to making great music, and if drugs can help you with that, at least in moderation, then that's great. Just try not to take it too far, because anything that you do in excess can lead to some poor consequences down the road. I mean, hell, water's good for you, but if you drink too much of it, you drown. So moderation, I think, would probably be the key, and make sure that you're not doing it just to be another cliche, because we don't need more cliches in this world. We need originals. And if doing drugs will help you become more original, then great. But if it's getting in the way of your life, it's getting in the way of your music, don't do it. Don't even or stop doing it if you're already doing it. At the end of the day, it should be about the music and not the drugs. And if you are using the music as just an excuse to get high, then maybe you have your priorities out of whack. I don't know, maybe. It would be at least something to consider. But if you find that it's helping your music, then great. I'm happy for you. I wish you the best of luck in this world, and continue to enjoy yourself and continue making great music. So anyways, I have no idea if this has been helpful. I know I sound like I'm on the fence about this, and it's because I probably am to a large degree. You kind of have to make your own decisions and your own choices in life, and you have to be willing to live with the consequences of those choices. And for some people, they can handle their drugs or their alcohol or their cigarettes or their whatevers, their vices. And for some people, they really can't. And I've seen it both destroy and help people out. And so I think you're going to have to figure out what it is that you want in life, the goals, the dreams you have, and use that as kind of a North Star to figure out if drugs are getting you closer to that or further away. If they're getting you closer, then, maybe continue doing what you're doing, but, just keep moderation in mind. And if they're taking you further away, stop. Get out of there. Do whatever you can to stop the things that are taking you further away from where you want to be. Yeah. Anyways, pros and cons of drugs. Is the question answered? I have no idea. But I hope this video has at least given you something to think about. And I hope that you all have a wonderful day and continue to make the greatest music that you possibly can. Thanks very much, and have a wonderful day. Bye.